I want to thank you, everybody, for joining us today. It's greatly appreciated. Today we're here to announce charges being authorized in the 1987 murder of Roxanne Wood. Patrick Wayne Gilham, 67 years old, of South Bend, Indiana, has been charged by the Berrien County Prosecutor's Office with open murder and breaking and entering of an occupied dwelling for the 1987 death of Roxanne Wood. Open murder is punishable by up to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The breaking and entering charge is punishable by up to 15 years in prison. These charges stem from allegations that Gilham forcibly entered the home of Wood on February 20th, 1987 in Niles Township, Berrien County, Michigan. Once inside, Gilham encountered Wood and murdered her in the home. Wood's husband arrived home shortly later, discovered the body, and contacted the police. Roxanne Wood was 30 years old at the time of her death. This case has been investigated extensively and continuously by the Michigan State Police since it happened. Most recently, it's been investigated by Detective Sergeant John Moore and Detective Sergeant Jason Bailey of the Michigan State Police Special Investigations Section. Gilham was arrested on Thursday, February 17th of this year by the South Bend Police Department, who was working to assist the Michigan State Police. At this time, we do not have any court dates for Mr. Gilham. Obviously, in the case of this nature, our sympathies go out to the family of Miss Woods and her husband. At this time, I can't speak any further as to the evidence in the case and any further details about the case, and that is for the protection of the integrity of the case and the protection of Mr. Gilham and his rights. These charges are merely accusations, and Mr. Gilham is presumed innocent unless and until proven guilty. At this time, Detective First Lieutenant Charles Christensen will also have a statement to make.
Thank you, Prosecutor Perangeli. Some of this we are going to cover over again, but before I do that, I want you to know who is standing up here with us. To my left, we have Detective Sergeant John Moore of the Niles Post. Next to him is Lieutenant Dwayne Robinson, and he is our Public Information Officer. Of course, Prosecutor Steve Perangeli directly behind me, Detective Sergeant Jason Bailey to my right, and then First Lieutenant Ryan Schoonveld, who's the post commander here at the Niles Post. So the two individuals that were spoken about by Prosecutor Perangeli, Jason and John, are the two individuals that really opened this case up, which I'll talk about a little bit here in my prepared statement. At the end of my statement, if you do have any questions, you can ask them, but as Prosecutor Perangeli mentioned, there are some things we just cannot get into at this point. I will tell you right now that we did talk to the family of Roxanne Wood last night, as well as her husband, Terry Wood, who was married to her at the time, and made them aware of the arrest. So they are all aware that Mr. Gilham has been arrested for the murder of Roxanne Wood. On Thursday, February 17th, 2022 at 1:15 p.m., Patrick Wayne Gilham, a white male, date of birth 9/5/54, was arrested at his residence by officers from South Bend Police Department on an extraditable warrant issued by the Berrien County Prosecutor's Office. Mr. Gilham has been charged with open murder and breaking and entering of an occupied dwelling in connection with the 1987 murder of Roxanne Lee Wood, 30 years of age at the time, in Niles Township, Michigan. Roxanne Wood lived at 1524 Tam O'Shanter Lane and was found murdered in the kitchen area of her home. Roxanne was discovered deceased in her home by her husband Terry Wood on February 20th, 1987 at approximately 1:15 a.m. Troopers and detectives from the Michigan State Police Niles Post responded to the scene and began the investigation of the homicide. Over the last 3.5 decades, the case has remained open, with any new information or tips investigated by the Michigan State Police. In 2001, our 5th District Cold Case Team comprised of 1 detective sergeant and 3 trooper investigators, worked exclusively on the Roxanne Wood case for over a year, investigating additional leads through interviews and evidence collection. In 2002, the 5th District Cold Case Team concluded their work on the investigation, which remained open without any arrests made. In August of 2020, Detective John Moore and Jason Bailey of the Michigan State Police Niles Post Special Investigation Section began to aggressively investigate this case. During their investigation, they reviewed 3,347 pages of information and continued the probe into the incident. The probe consisted of additional interviews, evidentiary review, surveillance operations, and the coordination of different resources within the Michigan State Police and coordinating agencies. Some of the law enforcement resources that supported this investigation was the Michigan State Police 5th District Undercover Fugitive Team, the Michigan State Police Technical Services Unit, and the South Bend Police Department. The suspect, Patrick Gilham, is a current resident of South Bend, Indiana. We would like to once again express our sympathy to Roxanne's family and her husband, Terry Wood, but are hopeful this latest news will provide them with some modicum of closure. If you have any questions or anyone has any information about this incident, we would ask that they contact the Michigan State Police Niles Post at 269-683-4411. And I will open it up to any questions that I can answer at this time, if anybody has any. Yes, sir?
Obviously, right now you said evidence, you can't discuss about it. How were you able to determine that Gilham, because I know there was DNA that was found on her body that night. 35 years later, how were you able to connect it back to him?
That will be something that will be learned through the court process. Obviously, techniques, there are new techniques out there that can be utilized, and that how we connected with him will be revealed through the court process.
And do we know of any connection that he had with her back then, or was there any connection to her at all?
We can't answer that right now because we don't know. But part of what you are going to receive today too in our official release is a photograph of him then and now. And what we would ask the public is if anybody has any information, not only on this incident or him, but any other incident that he may have been involved in.
Is there belief that he may have killed more than just her?
There is the belief, and I believe that he did other crimes. What those are, I can't tell you.
You mentioned that you talked to the family. Can you share a little bit about how Terry reacted? I mean, many years he's sort of been under a microscope. Can you sort of share a little bit about?
Yeah, he was he's very emotional, obviously, as anyone would be, and he was happy that this and thankful that this breakthrough has been made. And additionally, he expressed relief after this Sunday will be 35 years since this had happened. So he's processing that, as well as the rest of her family. Both Terry and her brothers and father were contacted last night, and they are all just trying to process the information.
You just mentioned, 35 years Sunday. I imagine you're detectives, and you guys probably feel pretty good. I mean, I'm sure you didn't lose hope, but 35 years is a long time. You know, I mean, I'm sure there was maybe, the family lost hope. So, I mean, can you just talk about that a little?
It is a long time. I can tell you, though, specifically her brother, Brad Wood, myself, and I know Jason Bailey and Fabian Soares, a former detective that preceded these two detectives at the post. Brad has been in contact with us since 2001 every year, and they've had to wait a long time, obviously, for this. But I wouldn't say there was a loss of hope. At least by him, he was always hopeful that we would be at this stage, and we are.
Was this case cracked by silence? I was trying to listen
I'm sorry?
Was this case cracked by science? Is science fact?
That's something that we can't get into at this point in time, based on our ethical obligations in the law. We can't comment at that because it is a pending case. You'll have to learn more about the evidence and what was done for it throughout the court process.
Say anything about what cracked it?
I can't say that at this time, sir.
Cold cases in general, is this approaching some kind of record, I guess, for the longest from commission to solution?
Many of us have worked cold cases through the years, been on our cold case team in different roles, whether it be a trooper investigator, detective sergeant, or a lieutenant. And I don't know that this is the oldest one. This is pretty old. I know of one case we worked that was a 1955 case. That was the oldest that I've ever worked personally. But this is pretty old in that at a point with cold case, there becomes a time when witnesses, suspects, people you need to talk to are getting up there in age and potentially not even around anymore and are deceased. So this is on the edge of that, right? The individuals at that time that we arrested are older, and that's one of the more difficult things to do as the case ages to that level, where you're going to start losing witnesses to death or suspects to death.
Were any investigators or law enforcement involved here at the time or at the scene of the crime?
That are still working? No, they are all retired. They are all retired, yes.
And you mentioned the fact of aging as time goes on. Can you explain a little bit, obviously without going into evidence, what are some of the challenges to make sure we get to this day over the past 35 years that took to get to here?
One of the big challenges is resources, because these are very labor intensive, and as cases age, the time is both a blessing and a curse in some instances, but most of the time it's a blessing because relationships change, and people that maybe wouldn't have talked 15 years ago now will talk because the relationship they had with somebody that either did something or had information has changed. But it's always a process and a lot of work finding out, because people relocate, right? We're a transient society, so to speak. So they're gonna move from point A to point B. So there's a lot of travel, there's a lot of interviews that need to be done, and just a lot of logistics that you have to overcome, and organization in case files.
Do you ever have your doubts? What does it feel like to this point?
Well, it's been, like I said, it's been a long time, and I think I speak for all of the investigators here, where when John Moore called me a year and a half ago and said, I want to pick this up and start working it again. And we talked about it, and we talked that if we are going to work this, we got to give it 100% effort, because once you start working a case and are out there doing interviews, you get the family's hopes up, right? So when he started working it, we were hopeful still that we could do something and solve this case, obviously. Otherwise, we wouldn't have worked it to the point that both Jason and John did. So as far as how we feel now, there's relief that we have an individual arrested for this, but I can tell you there's a lot of investigative work that will continue from this point. Just because an arrest is made, the investigation never stops. There's always many more things to do, and in this case, we still have many more things to do.
Just for clarification, I'm sifting through some of the other court documents. Can you provide his middle name or initial?
It was Wayne, right?
Yes.
Wayne.
And you mentioned that you picked up the case about a year and a half ago. Was that when this kind of new evidence or whatever that you guys were able to say, hey, might be him? Is that like a time frame, or is that something to wait for court documents?
This case was picked up because we thought it was workable at that point. So what we had is what we had, and when we talked about it, John and I and Jason, we thought that there was a good possibility we could have some success.
And forgive me if you've already answered this, but was Patrick Wayne Gilham a suspect in previous investigations, or is he a new name coming forward?
Not in any of our investigations, but he does have a history.
Gotcha. Was he a resident of Niles, or is he always
South Bend.
Okay.
Chuck, you mentioned you're gonna give us 2 pictures of him,
Mhm.
one now, and is the other one from around that time, is that, I assume, the IDOC when he was in the Department of Corrections there in like 86? Is that what the other photo is?
I believe that is the other photo.
Okay, so court records in Indiana have him of being convicted and 80 or pleading guilty in 80 to breaking and entering and attempted deviant conduct, I believe. It seems kind of close. Is that something we can't touch on?
That's something we can't speak about today. Any
Okay.
type of history or character evidence of his, we can't speak to that at this point.
I figured. And then last thing is just, is there any indication if he's going to waive extradition, or has he not, we haven't gotten there yet? Probably.
We haven't gotten to that issue at that point.
All right, great.
I will, at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Prosecutor Perangeli to see if you have anything more for him. But we will, Lieutenant Robinson is going to be sending out through our Twitter feed the photographs as well as an email to all of the area and surrounding news agencies with the photos and a basic copy of this news release.
And the prosecutor's office will be sending out a written press release also to follow up on what was given here today. When we do hear about court dates, we will update everybody as to when those court dates are. Again, I know as Detective Christensen was speaking, at certain times there are certain things that we just simply can't talk about in terms of evidence and anything along those lines. Great. So if you have nothing further, I appreciate you being here and I appreciate your time today.